Worldwide, there is a trend toward decentralization, the breaking up of large structures, inefficient, friction-borne, heat-borne structures that are more and more the enemy of the people they ostensibly serve. You see this problem in many industries that are being challenged by the digital sector, by digital technology and the internet. That would be sectors such as the taxi industry, the hotel industry. Education itself is decentralizing toward homeschooling, and perhaps if we can be optimistic toward a certification of students rather than institutions and schools. That's something that again is allowed by technology and databases and software. Now, what about in even states? We have efforts in states such as California to break up or break off from the larger political body because of the impression that residents have in those areas that they're not being represented, that they're giving more than they're receiving in the way of so-called government services. Now, here in Chattanooga, in the Hamilton County area, we have a very similar story, and it's brought about by people on Signal Mountain, a very perceptive group of families and men and women working on a committee to make the schools that serve those families up on the mountain more responsive and more efficient. That is to say, with less overhead, less friction, internal friction that you have in any part of a large system such as Hamilton County Department of Education, which has many schools that it overlooks. And we have with us this morning Dr. John Friedel, who is a longtime academician. He has 5 college degrees. He's taught law, anthropology, political science, business law. He retired in 2013 and came here as a provost at UTC in 2002. So he's an academician and is working with several others on Signal Mountain to review the prospect of a secession, of a separation of that town and 3 schools. And with him are Dr. Tom McCullough, a very well-known local educator and administrator, medical doctor Thomas Peterson, and 4 others who are some of them very highly qualified as far as official credentials go. They've put out a report. And John Friedel, what is the main argument that you would describe for my listener? The main argument for the separation of Signal Mountain schools, these 3 schools, from the main body in Hamilton County.
Thank you, David. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. About 1.5 years ago, a group of folks who live on Signal Mountain got together and began exploring the possibility of forming a separate municipal school district. And it was born out of a dissatisfaction with the services, or maybe I should say the inadequacy of services and funding that was being provided to the mountain schools by the Hamilton County Department of Education. They worked for about 6 months and put together a report that they presented to the town council. And the town council then decided that this was worth looking at more in depth. And so the town council then appointed our 7-member committee and gave us the charge of determining whether a separate school district would be feasible. They specifically asked us not to recommend one way or the other whether this is something that we should do, but simply to tell them whether it was possible to do it, and if so, to provide a kind of a roadmap as to how to accomplish separation. We spent about 8 or 9 months looking into every aspect of forming and sustaining a municipal school district. And the first thing we looked at was whether a separate school district would actually result in an improved quality of education for the 2,400 students in our 3 schools. So that was the threshold question, because if we couldn't demonstrate that quality would be improved, it didn't matter whether it was feasible. If you're not going to make any improvements, if you're just going through the motions because you want to go through the motions, then why bother to do it? So we had a number of ways of looking at quality. We did a community survey of parents and teachers and concerned citizens on the mountain. We looked at some of the additional enhancements to education that are provided not by Hamilton County, but by local residents on the mountain. And the committee made a trip to Shelby County, Memphis, Tennessee, where 6 communities in the suburbs of Memphis had split off from the Shelby County system. And we heard from the superintendents and mayors and town managers in 5 of those 6 communities. And without exception, they all were absolutely ecstatic about the improvements in education that they had seen in the 3 years since they had split off from the county system. So, long answer to your question, but I think the answer is we think that the argument that is most important is that with local control of our educational system and with local management of our financial resources, that the Signal Mountain community can do a better job of educating its students than is currently being done by the Hamilton County system.
There's a long list on page 14 of your report, Dr. Friedel, of things benefits that accrue to these breakaway districts, including 1 added nurse, more clerical staff, added STEM program, 1 added a leadership academy, upgrading windows, down in the details, a quality television studio at Houston High School out there. And also this one just jumped out at me. It wasn't put in bold or anything. Built reserve funds of approximately $10 million. In one of
that is pretty impressive.
That's remarkable.
That was a list. I'm looking at the report. That was a list from, I think it was Jason Manuel in Germantown, wasn't it? Yeah. Jason Manuel was actually in Signal Mountain. We had a forum Monday night, I believe it was,
yes,
at our local town hall. And he was one of the folks from Shelby County who came to Signal Mountain to just talk about his experience there. And every time he picked up the microphone, a big smile broke out on his face. He is an absolute proponent of local control, improving the quality of education, and he uses his own experience as an example of why it works.
Now, these people who are for the breaking away of Signal Mountain, we have to make it clear, Dr. Friedel, they are advocates of public education, right? They're not anti-public education, as some charter school advocates are described. They are for public education. They're not advocating getting out of the state system. They're not advocating getting out from under.
Not
the
at all. That issue, that question never arose in our discussions, and it has never been something that we have considered as an alternative. I don't think anyone up here is interested in establishing a private community education system. Now, having said that, we need to recognize that there is a fairly significant segment of our community and the wealthier side of the spectrum who send their kids to private schools. And Chattanooga has some excellent private schools. Baylor, McCallie, GPS, Notre Dame. It's a long list of private schools that do very well and have excellent track records in educating their kids.
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
One of the questions that was taken into consideration in looking at what Signal Mountain might be able to do better is the fact that from the transition from elementary school to middle and high school, Signal Mountain schools lose a significant percentage of their students to private schools. Parents send their kids to the elementary schools, and when they reach the 6th grade, now that Baylor and the other schools accept sixth graders into their middle school programs, the kids go off the mountain to school. So we're trying to figure out how we can keep those kids. And one of the ways to do it is to improve the quality of the services that we can provide through our middle high school.
Well, why is it important to keep Signal Mountain children in Signal Mountain schools, John Friedel? Why is that valuable for the committee's perspective?
I'm sorry.
My question is, why is it important for your committee and maybe the city fathers to keep Signal Mountain students in Signal Mountain schools and not have them go down into the county?
Well, it's not a question of something that we have to do. It should be something that we want to do. Kids leaving public school to go to private school is symptomatic of something that we're not able to provide. And when you look at the symptom, you really need to address the cause as well. If we were doing a better job of educating our kids in the middle and high school level, we wouldn't be losing as many to the private schools. So I think when you look at it from that point of view, the question answers itself, doesn't it?
We're talking with Dr. John Friedel from the Committee on Signal Mountain that is weighing and making an analysis of whether it's feasible with an interest in quality of education. Is it feasible for the 3 county schools that are on Signal Mountain to secede, to be taken over by the town? Now, there are several problems that your analysis, Dr. Friedel, goes into, and I don't want to lose sight of the main one. That's the ownership of these 3 buildings. But before we get to that question, just put that on the back of your mind. I'd like you to give something of your analysis, please, of the local control and the advantage of local control and chain of command. Doctor, your colleague on the committee, Dr. Dr. McCullough, tells of the chain of command problems as sort of typical of the problem of being part of a larger system. What is the chain of command analysis?
Well, if we put it in a broader context, Hamilton County is a school system that consists of, I believe the number is 76 schools and 42,000 students. Signal Mountain has 3 buildings and 2,400 students. So just in terms of the ability to communicate and discuss the issues that arise, the problems that need to be solved, if you can do that locally and your communication is faster and more direct, then the results ought to be better. When Dr. McCullough was principal of our middle high school, he was having to communicate by telephone or fax or email with folks at the central office, which is located down the mountain and what is it off? Where is the HCDE office located?
Well,
off
go
153. Ahead. So it's not like you could jump in the car and drive down and have a conversation easily. And frankly, the folks in the central office don't have firsthand knowledge of what's going on Signal Mountain. That's a problem. They've got a district with 42,000 students and 76 buildings that they have to keep track of. But just one example that Dr. McCullough relayed to us in our committee meetings that I put in the report. We had a situation where one winter day it was snowing on the mountain and it was raining in the valley. That's pretty common, actually. In the winter months, we get snow long before they do down below. It's 5 degrees colder up here. And so Dr. McCullough said, I really think the roads are going to be fairly dangerous pretty soon if the snow keeps coming. And a lot of the kids in the high school drive to work or drive to school. And of course, we don't want buses running on icy roads. So he said, I think we need to close school early to send the kids home before the roads get dangerous. So he called the central office and said, I'd like to close the schools early because the conditions up here are dangerous. And down below, where they didn't have snow, they said, well, hold off. We're not ready to make that decision yet. And he waited, and he waited, and finally he said, I'm just going to do this on my own because I think I need to make that decision. And he closed the school early without having permission, so to speak, from his superiors in the central office. He just sent everybody home. And later that day, the conditions got so bad that they closed the schools throughout the county. But Dr. McCullough the next day received a reprimand because he had acted unilaterally without permission from his superior in the central office. Now, that may be one example that seems kind of remote, but I think it illustrates the problem that folks up here in the community recognize issues that are local and are able to communicate about them more rapidly and more effectively than when you're speaking about a large decentralized system. Now, when I say that, I also need to emphasize that this isn't just about the Signal Mountain community. I don't want to convey the impression that the folks who live on Signal Mountain think that we're different and better and that our problems are unique or anything like that. For Hamilton County is you've got a number of smaller communities that together make up the county system. And if you don't have adequate representation and communication within those communities, they're all going to have similar experiences. Eastridge might have a different experience than Signal Mountain, but that doesn't make it less important and less valuable. Red Bank or Ooltewah or Lookout Mountain or Hickson, they've all got their own special interests and special concerns. And when you have to make decisions from the point of view that one size fits all and we can only have so much variety in the way we provide services, then I think everybody suffers.
Let me ask you about the buildings and the custody and ownership of those three buildings, Dr. Friedel. We're talking with John Friedel of the Signal Mountain Committee, looking at the effort to decentralize at least part of the county school system into a separate district in a separate state supervised school district on Signal Mountain. What about the ownership of the schools? The county indicates it through its attorney's office that it's not willing to let those go. What seems to be the direction of case law in like circumstances, John?
Well, this was an issue that was raised before our committee was even formed. When there was a discussion with the town council back in December, I believe, or early January. Our committee wasn't appointed until February, but immediately after the first mention was made in the town council of a possibility of looking into separating, the attorney for the Hamilton County Department of Education sent an email to the attorney for Signal Mountain saying, Hamilton County will not release custody of the buildings. If you want to form a separate school district, you can do that, but we're going to sell or repurpose the buildings and we're not going to let you use them. They have made that argument a number of different ways, using a number of different legal tactics. I will just say that there are counter arguments on the other side that the buildings actually go with the children rather than staying with Hamilton County Department of Education. But ultimately, that's going to be an issue that has to be decided either in the courts or hopefully through some sort of negotiation with the Hamilton County Commission and possibly the Board of Education.
Well, it seems like the state interest would be best served, John Friedel, if the schools went with the children, because the state does want to maintain its hegemony, its control over all of its charges, if you will, all of its wards. And so to keep them in the system, to keep them satisfied, and the local operators, it would seem that your argument would probably, I'm just guessing, would prevail.
Well, if you think about it, who owns the buildings? Who paid for the buildings? The taxpayers. And if you argue that, well, the Signal Mountain taxpayers didn't pay the full freight of the Signal Mountain school buildings, well, that's true, but Signal Mountain taxpayers pay taxes to Hamilton County, and those tax dollars paid for schools in Red Bank and in downtown Chattanooga and in college. I mean, they paid for the tax dollars, paid for the schools, and they all go into one pot and they all come out of the same pot.
This is David Tulis. We're talking with John Friedel. John, thank you for joining us. David Tulis.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4 and 92.7 FM.